Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here, and this is the desktop lecture for week 14, which is entitled Robert Noyce and All Things Integrated. So, at first glance, when you see the heading on this module or this chapter, you see the name Robert Noyce, and I would argue that probably few of you, if any, in the course know who Robert Noyce is, and it's not just you. I would argue most people on the street in the U.S. today, if you would ask them who Robert Noyce is, they would have no idea. But what he has done and what he invented was as important as Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse and electrification, as far as I'm concerned, because Noyce was the one who really was the father of the integrated circuit. So the integrated circuit is closely related to the microprocessor, and I think you all know that the IC, or the microprocessor, is in all of our cell phones, all of our computers, everything digital. The entire digital age is due to the integrated circuit, because prior to the integrated circuit we had the transistor for a short time, and then prior to the transistor was the vacuum tube, the big old glass vacuum tube. And most of you in this class are too young to remember the vacuum tube, but back in the day, televisions, radios, amplifiers, everything was vacuum tube technology. It was they resembled really kind of a really small, narrow light bulb, if you will, and they were necessary for any of these electronic devices to work prior to the 70s, actually. So the transistor was a leap forward from the vacuum tube and made things possible, like the transistor radio. Again, really the biggest point is all of these devices, as digital technology and electronic technology evolved, all of the devices got smaller. So the big tubed radios were huge. They were the size of multiple shoeboxes. And then the transistor radio that came out in the 60s was about the size of a pack of cigarettes, and that was a really big deal. But that was a transistor radio. So the next phase of electrical processing, if you will, was really the integrated circuit, and Robert Noyce, the inventor, was one of the co-inventors of the circuit, and his life is really interesting, and it spans this transition of time between old and new, and I'll explain more of that as we get into it. So the reason that Noyce is important, obviously, is the development of the microprocessor, the integrated circuit. He and his partners, Andy Grove, Gordon Moore, they went on to form Intel in the 60s out in Silicon Valley. And so, obviously he's important because of that invention. But the other reason he's important is because he really, I think, represents this transition between old and new as far as business goes. And when I say old and new, I'm talking about this digital divide. So at some point in time in the 70s and between the 70s and the 90s, things became very digital, and it changed our lives in a major way. So that's why Noyce is important. He grew up in Grinnell, Iowa. I've been to Grinnell, Iowa before. It's a really nice town off of Interstate 80. He went to Grinnell College there, went to a small college, and got his degree in engineering, and was recruited by a gentleman named Robert Shockley, who invented the transistor. And this was a time when there was really no Silicon Valley to speak of. Most of the electronics industries were based on the East Coast, and for the first time ever, with the advent of the semiconductor, Fairchild Semiconductor is one of the first companies that really moved out west. Noyce and his colleagues in Fairchild Semiconductor really were the first company to locate in Silicon Valley. So Noyce is important not only because of his invention, but also because he's really sort of the father of Silicon Valley culture as well. And by that I mean not only establishing Silicon Valley as the home of all things digital, which it obviously is today, but also the way that he believed a company should be run. So when we talk about American business, we really haven't talked about hierarchy and the way we work. Most of us have our jobs. We have a boss, and there's a boss above that and a boss above that, so we understand the hierarchy. One of the things that Noyce did in the early days of Intel was he tried to make it as flat of a company as he could. And what I mean by that is it was very egalitarian. So it was everybody was equal. So there wasn't special parking spaces. There wasn't special offices. Everyone had the same type of cubicle. You parked wherever you want to, and he really didn't believe in this hierarchy. He believed everyone should work together, and along with that, he also believed that if you had a good idea and you worked in the company, that you would be allowed to have time to work on that idea, even if it wasn't part of the corporation's strategic plan. So that whole vibe, that whole idea of some freedom to work on new ideas is shared widely today at companies like Apple and Amazon and Google, of course. So again, Noyce really pioneered this sort of flat infrastructure in companies where everyone was seen as equal, and also was one of the first ones to value employees' contributions and ideas to the corporation. So that's Noyce in a nutshell. You're going to watch a documentary this week called The Podfather, and it's about 50 minutes long, so almost an hour. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time to watch it, because I'll be asking some questions from the documentary on the quiz this week. The other thing I want you to do this week is you're going to read an article about the integrated circuit and how revolutionary it was. That's important when we talk about technology, of course. And also, you're going to read an article about Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple Computer, and his relationship with Noyce early on. And it's pretty cool, because if you look at the lineage of Silicon Valley, you see Robert Noyce as one of the early innovators in the 50s and 60s, and then and into the 70s, and then Steve Jobs comes along and he meets Noyce, so they actually talk, and Steve Jobs is fast friends with Noyce and really learns a lot from him. So that's one thing I want you to take notice of in the video. And then it's also kind of cool to think about that, because we go from Noyce to Jobs, and then Steve Jobs meets with Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the founders of Google, a little bit later on in the same type of way. So you can see this lineage straight from Noyce all the way to Google and most of the other companies that operate out of Silicon Valley. So I think it's valuable. It's really cool because it spans this time between modern digital and early electronics, and it's a story that we should all know. So that's it for this week. Be safe, take care, have a good one. Bye-bye.